Hello, hello. I know I keep mentioning it and I can see my mouth moving and no words coming out, but I hope you can see things going better the other side. Fantastic presentations today, and I think that this one is going to be even a highlight. No pressure, Sam. Like I said in the last session, we thoroughly enjoyed the presentation that Azuka did this morning, and it stimulated a lot of really great discussion. So I'm not going to waffle for very much longer, but just to introduce Sam Oppenheimer, who's the general manager of Duca, a product that I think we're all just ever so slightly intrigued by and interested in. So over to you, Sam.
Hi, Jenny. Let me see if technology works for me today, and I can share my screen. And if I can do that, then we're in a really good spot.
Fingers crossed.
How does that look?
It looks brilliant.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Lovely to have you today. I really hope you're having a great day. The presentations I've seen have just been amazing today. So glad you can make it. Today, I really want to dive into what I think is a big theme of the 2020s here in Africa. And that's the local spending opportunities and how we reconcile that with regional priorities. And it's a huge part of how the continent's success will look like over the next decade. So to dive into it a little bit more, we sit in this apparent contradiction of a dual mandate. On one hand, in country, we get told spend local, spend local, spend local. In South Africa, they call it broad-based Black economic empowerment. In Kenya, they call it build Kenya, buy Kenya. The name is different across different regions, but the idea is the same. Let's support our local communities. At a regional level, we get told we're together as a region. We're together as Africa. We're together as ECOWAS. We're together as SADC. We're together as the East African community. And at some level, those two things don't quite seem to match up. There seems to be an apparent contradiction between the two. But when you dive into the heart of it, I think there's actually a vast opportunity. There's a huge opportunity that sits about working and actually getting these two mandates to work together for us, to make sure that this can work together for business across the African community. This opportunity is growing. I'm going to talk about that and show you how it's growing and what it means. And we can also talk about how we can fit these pieces together and how we can get there. So I think the first place to really start is to go back a little bit and talk a little bit about why we have these mandates. Why in government's infinite wisdom have they decided that these two mandates about where we should focus come to place? And to start with the local side, I think all of us have been talked to from a local perspective about why local spending is important a lot. But it is, and it's incredibly important. It's one of the key drivers of development. When you've got this quote up here from Vusifele from ABSA, talking about how actually local small business spending is the heart of society prospering. It's the heart of how corporates can interact with their local communities. And you look at that and local spending leads to significant upside. It leads to stronger control, CO2 footprint comes down, stronger relationships, stronger communities, jobs and development. The upside is really clear. At the same time, when you change the picture and you look regionally, we're really behind from a regional perspective. The upside from a regional perspective is really there as well. We're 40% behind other continents in how we trade. The graph you're looking at here looks and says, how much do we export inside Africa? And then compares it to the Americas, to Asia and Europe. And we lag. And we lag by a huge amount. And that upside is material and could be material for African business. The question that begs out of this is why we lag. Why does Africa lag in this space? And it really comes down to 4 bits. 1 around rules and regulations, 2 around customs and ports, 3 around how easy it is to transfer across there, and 4 about building our local capacity. And I'm going to go through and show how actually these 2 things, when you consider those 4 barriers that hold us back from our potential as an African continent, we can really get there. We can really transform where we are. But there's not only positive upside reasons for why it's important to do this. There's significant downside reasons. we're squeezed from every angle. The world of the last 10 years has been beset by people forming blocks and excluding, I think is the right word. When you look, the trade war that's gone on between America and China echoes into today. When you look at it and the IMF looks at it and says, how does it affect Africa? Somebody who's not even party to the China-America trade war conflict. It's going to affect us by a 1.5% GDP down. And a lot of that is because we don't stand together. We stand apart and we're fragmented and isolated. And if we can stand together, it puts us on a footing to have influence. It puts us on a footing where our huge population, our huge potential can actually exert power on the world stage. I have here a few different places where, Europe or America or China has unilaterally exposed tariffs, from Donald Trump with his sweeping steel tariff that wiped out South Africa's steel industry, to the EU and carbon tariffs. And all of that comes in because we don't have a proper seat at the table. We struggle to exert the influence that we deserve and we should exert. And you can see this. I think there's a good example to step to the UK, right? This is the status quo for us across the African continent. We are fragmented, we are isolated. But the UK chose that. The UK chose to fragment away from the EU. And that has had an effect where 2 to 3% of their GDP is knocked off. We're in the opposite position. We can choose to stand together, to be stronger together, and to get that upside together. So I think not only is there a huge positive upside for local and regional mandates, there's a huge negative downside, my apologies, if we don't pull this off successfully. So I want to talk a little bit, stepping away from why we've ended up in these mandates and what these mandates are about, to talk about what the size of the upside is. What is the size of the upside for the African continent if we get this right? And I think there's a lot of different regional agreements. There's ECOWAS, there's SADC, there's the EAC, but I'm going to dive in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, AFSA. And when you look at it, this is the biggest and the most wide-ranging. It's the one that stretches across the whole of Africa. It's been ratified by 46 different nations across Africa, and it's a huge deal. I mean, it's working. I think it's a big part of lowering tariffs by 90% between every single country across the whole of the continent. However, when you look at it, right, this is really a government-focused opportunity. This is government looking and saying, how can we reduce the barriers? That first thing that I talked about. How can we reduce the rules and regs to trading across borders? Secondly, how can we make it easier to do that from a customs and port perspective? How can we make it so it flows easily? But it isn't speaking to the opportunity that is in the private sector in this space. What they've estimated is they've gone in and they've estimated the upside. But that upside is not dependent solely on government. A huge part of that upside comes out of the private sector. Government is lowering barriers. Private sector is going to build the bridges. And so when you look at that upside, that $450 billion upside, it's about building that bridges. That upside, just to put it in perspective, right? The South African economy is $411 billion. We're adding an entire new South Africa to the African continent in the next 12 years. Just think about that from an upside. Think about that from an opportunity. Think about that from an opportunity across every sector. And so when we talk about that, let's step away from government reducing the barriers, which is a government thing, to talking about us as private sector building these bridges. How do we make sure that these bridges and these opportunities become real? How can we, let's pull a sector, let's pull movies. How can we make sure that movies get in from Ghana to Nigeria, from Nigeria to Zambia, from Zambia to Botswana? How do we make sure that the African space is actually connected? We've built these bridges across every sector. When you're looking at an opportunity that's this big, you're looking at every sector across manufacturing, services. There is opportunity there for you. And not only is there direct opportunity, there's opportunity on the back end, from financing, from logistics, from all the work that goes into making an interconnected supply chain. I mean, if you purely look at a European example of how this can look and go to Airbus. Airbus builds big planes. Where does Airbus build its big planes? Well, the tails come from Germany. The tail wings come from Spain. The fuselages come from France. The wings come from the UK. That's an interconnected world. That's a place where they're generating huge value and built the bridges between those spaces. And it's up to us as the private sector to realize this opportunity, to really build and make it easy to work across these borders. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we feed that in and how we make that opportunity, realizing that region, realizing those regional opportunities, and how we bring the local companies into that, right? Because we have this dual mandate around building this regional opportunity, this vast new opportunity of a new South Africa-sized world in Africa. But at the same time, local communities don't have access to it. Local companies don't have access to it. If you go back 10 years and you said you wanted somebody in Zambia to do business with somebody in the Congo, the answer was no, it's not possible. We've now come to the point with digital and the way digital is that we can actually do it. It is possible. It is possible to build a virtuous cycle. As we companies build and exploit that opportunity, that 450 billion opportunity, by strengthening and building our intra-Africa links, we can link in our local businesses, provide them access, give them the space to grow in that space. And that increases in turn their capacity to deliver. Also solving one of the key barriers into African trade, solving this lack of local capacity, solving this idea that we can get stuff local that's as good as anywhere in the world, bringing together and looping that circle into a virtuous circle that can build upon itself, that then leads to stronger connections across our borders, that opens that opportunity even more. And when you look at this, this is the final part of the story of linking the two and changing what is an apparent contradiction into a proper opportunity. But this is a little abstract. All of this stuff, it's at high level, it's about opportunities, it's about general business. How do we link it in? How do we realize this 450 billion opportunity in supply chain, in procurement, in the areas that we really care about? How do we do that? How do we make it real for these local businesses? And so when you look at this and you look at saying how we make it real, making it real for these local businesses is getting their products more easily in front of people. It's putting their products in front of big buyers across the continents. It's helping giving access to the digital systems that sell easily cross borders. It's helping to get them so they can put their products and services in front of people straight up, in front of people who are buying, building those connections, helping with access, helping give democratized supplier access, and then also helping with the challenges that businesses face across the continent. That's cash flow challenges, logistics challenges, making sure that the process is all transparent. So all of that, I think these are not new things to you if you've worked in emphasizing local. The new aspect is not only emphasizing local spend in your own company, it's bringing it into your Africa ambition, bringing it into your intra-Africa connections, bringing it into and making it a success story at a regional level, not just a local level. And so here I wanted to talk a little bit about diving into the area that we focus on and talking about how we build these locally inclusive bridges, how we build these bridges that can realize this $450 billion potential that we are sitting on, that we can reach for, and how we build them in a local manner. And here I want to talk a little bit about one of those bridges. It's one of the ways that we can build those bridges, which is digital B2B marketplaces. At its heart, a digital B2B marketplace is a way to connect. It's a way to provide an aspect that 10 years ago you would have done in person. 10 years ago, you would have had a marketplace, a genuine in-physical marketplace. But at the same time, when you look regionally, that doesn't work. If somebody looks from an African perspective and looks from a South Africa to a Zambian perspective, you couldn't fly to Zambia to do a single deal. But the digital world has opened that up. The digital world has turned it so that actually we have the technology to connect. We have the technology to reach across and provide those connections. At the same time, we can do that in a really efficient manner. We're not making it so the cross-border transactions cost hundreds of dollars. We're bringing down the price of transactions across borders. We're building transparency and trust in the system. We're building this idea that you can reach out across and you can see it. You can see it. You're sitting in Lusaka and you want to reach across and you can see the suppliers. You can see how they've transacted. You can see what they do, who vets them, who stands up for them, who shows that they have the right quality. Oh, I want to go do business in Nigeria, but I know nothing about Nigeria. Can I use a marketplace to find who MTN trusts in Nigeria, who company who's operated in Nigeria for 20 years trusts? How can I use a marketplace to build those connections, to be at the root of building an interconnected Africa? At the same time as doing that very digitally efficiently, building in the bottom end that says, actually, this is a controlled space. There's quality here. There's control assurance. There's all of the stuff that makes it not a free-for-all. This is not everyone and their donkey. This is a place for trusted suppliers to come and build these bridges and realize the $450 billion of expansion, of growth, of potential that is sitting out there for us to seize as private companies. And so I want to talk a bit about why I think really now is a great moment to seize on that potential. I want to talk about the fact that we often get bogged down. We get bogged down. I talk about this seizing of potential and creating value, but so often we get bogged down into tactical discussions. What's the next crisis? Can we get through this week? Can we get to where we need to get to? We lag. We get stuck. We get stuck without being able to look past our own feet. 8% of us say we are where we want to be when we step back and look. Only 21% of us say we are strong when we step back and look at our digital capabilities. That's pretty damning, right? We get so trapped in the tactical world that we lag on our investments from a strategic point of view. But when you look at that and you step back, that's not a sustainable way to operate. We need to think further. We need to think beyond and say, how can we create value? How can we access that $450 billion value for companies? How can we access that from a private sector? How can we be the backbone of value creation? How can we bring in digital systems that bring us? And this is top of mind for a lot of people. Bringing in about half say they want to bring this in over the next year immediately. 60% say it's top of mind to make this value creation aspect of what we do more and more important. And so this is a big moment for us to actually drive the digital change we want to see, for us to not be receivers, for us to not be the people who are always catching up, for the people who are always catching up to the last trend, for us to be looking forward, to be looking and saying, how can we create the next trend? How can we create more value? How can we access this real opportunity that's going to be there for us on a regional basis? And how can we bring in our local supply? And this is true across the supply chain, but it's even more true in the indirect and tail space. I think we're all very familiar with the rule that 20% of the value of where we spend sucks up 80% of our effort. The tail spend, our long tail, our non-core, our indirect, somebody called it the other day to me, the nuisance space, sucks up our time. It sucks it up in dealing with rogue spend, dealing with places that it's gone wrong, dealing with a massive effort for not much value, dealing with the fact that actually it's not, a lot of times it's bottom of mind, dealing with the fact that we don't have tools focused on it, or we don't have the resources. All of these things lead to this where we're putting 80% of the effort in and we're not realizing value. When you look at that 80% of the effort, we don't realize anything like the value that we realize on our other 20% of the effort. In this space across tail and indirect and nuisance spaces, we realize half of the value that we realize in the direct space. That's painful, right? That's painful. And it's because we don't think about it. We react to this space. We don't think about it proactively and get forward and get in front of this space and get how can we deal with it most effectively. And that's where I want to step in and talk about B2B marketplaces. This is a new way of doing this spend, of managing this spend. It's a way of being proactive, of driving it, of taking all these issues that we've seen and we've struggled with and making them actually value drivers for us, removing the effort, shifting the effort from our teams of managing huge numbers of suppliers and shifting it to a marketplace, giving us the access on the back end, the transparencies that we need to make sure we know where it's going, to make sure we're not having rogue spend. It's not going to different and rogue areas, to make sure that it is priority for the B2B marketplace. It's not priority maybe for the whole department, but it's priority for the guys who are really focusing on it and making sure that the dedicated tools can create the value that we want in this space, to make sure that not only can we create value at a regional level, we can create value by looking more strategically at our indirect spend, create value by creating value for our local communities beyond just our spend, local inclusiveness at a regional level. So I'm conscious that we're a little bit late on time, so this is going to be my last slide, just so we can have a proper time for questions and answers should anyone have any. But I think at the end of the day, my key message to people is that we need to step outside of our box a little bit. We need to stop this idea that this is a reactive space, that we react to the latest crisis, we react to the latest trend, and think actually about the value that we can create. The value that we can create both on a regional level by being proactive, the value that we can create at a local level by driving local integration into our regional connections, and the value we can create by thinking forward, by thinking ahead. This is a huge opportunity. This is a transformative opportunity for the African continent over the next 10 years. It's the sort of opportunity that doesn't come by a lot. It's the sort of opportunity that sits there and it's a last shot. I went past a quote earlier from His Excellency, the chairperson of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Mr. Wenkele Mene. And he says that this is our last chance. This is a chance to create that value. And that seems big, but it matters to us and where we sit. It matters in supply chain. It matters in procurement, that we don't get stuck in a reactive space. If we react to this opportunity, by the time we wake up to what we need to have done, it will be too late. We need to be proactive. We need to sit down and say, how can we build the bridges that we need to connect African communities? How can we build and strategically think about the areas that have been overlooked? How can we build the local connections into these regional networks? So I think that's the final thing I want to leave you with, is that at the end of the day, this inherent contradiction between regional objectives and local objectives only exists when you think about it in terms of a minimization exercise. You think about it in terms of who can we minimize the least. It doesn't exist. The moment you change your mind, to see the value that you can create in this space, the value that you can create for your corporate, the value that you can create for the business, and the value you can create both at a regional level for the African community and your local communities by giving access. So I want to pause there and say, Jenny, I don't know how you want to handle it, but happy to open up for questions that anyone might have, happy to open up for any thoughts or observations or other things.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say, wow, what a great presenter you are, and what a fabulous presentation it was. Short, sharp, sweet, informative, and really, I also want to say just such a huge thank you to this audience, because you people out there in the cheap seats, you are just doing an amazing job today. The comments are awesome. The engagement is out of this world, and you've really just kept everything moving along. So thank you all as well. Sam, if you look in the discussion panel, you'll just see how you stimulated the conversation. So many people. One of my things in my simple mind is that it's time for people to stop thinking Africa, oh shame. This is really the moment, and if it is our last chance, then we've got to give it all that we've got, and that's where this community can really, really drive things forward. There are a couple of things, Edwin's made some really good points. His last question is, are we going to tolerate diversity. And it goes back to the whole thing about, can we really have African unity?
Yeah.
Open question, I don't know.
I think that at the end of the day, we have such an upside on the carrot side and such a downside on the stick side about the African unity question. I think all it takes is looking and saying, like, I traveled once. One of the things I was very fortunate to be able to do was to be part of a delegation from South Africa to Morocco. And Morocco and South Africa have this unique position where they can connect and they can really build a lot of business together. And at the same time, they were getting in the way of themselves. They couldn't see past what their polar distance, their polar differences, to actually see that potential. And, you stood in these conversations, and then we walked out of this call, and we didn't get what we wanted to. I'll be very frank out of that. We didn't get it as far as we wanted. And then you walked out of it, and it was serendipity. But a month or two later, the EU announced new tariffs. And they were just a small bit of new tariffs. And it just drove home to me what the stick was. We're dealing with a world that's going to be ever more closed off. You've got the Inflation Reduction Act in America, which isn't the Inflation Reduction Act. What it is, it's the I care about my local economy and I want American over anyone else Act. You've got the Europeans about to launch the same thing. And in all of that, we get fragmented. We aren't big enough to come to the table. The Chinese are. If the Chinese premier, as much as the Americans and the Chinese don't see eye to eye, if they want a meeting next week, they get a meeting. If we want a meeting, if South Africa wants a meeting, if Rwanda wants a meeting with the US president about tariffs, it takes months. It takes years. And that downside is so painful. And then you look at the upside. You look at what the potential of embracing our diversity is, of taking that 13% into African trade and bringing it to 50. It's adding so much business, so much opportunity, so much realized upside. This is not a zero-sum game. And yes, I entirely agree with the commentators who are talking about government needs to reduce the barriers. It's a prerequisite. We need to reduce the barriers. We can't operate under this idea that you can do this in a difficult government environment. But that is happening. That is happening. Government in this African Continental Free Trade Agreement is reducing the barriers. They're coming down 90% across it, and it's being ratified. There were people saying that, the Nigerians would never ratify it. The South Africans would never ratify it. It's there, and it's coming. And so we do need the frameworks and the right spaces to work on these things. But at the same time, we as the private sector can take a leading role in building those bridges to realize that opportunity, to make that opportunity real. Sorry, I went on a bit of a too long answer.
That's all right, and I think the audience as well. I think we could sit and have this discussion for ages. We are lucky that we've got a break now, so that we can keep up. Sam, I don't know whether you're available to go into the lounge and sit at a table, maybe table 2, and anyone who's got questions for you can join while we're in the break. Because I really think it's an important discussion. It's something, and I love the fact that this theme that I sort of not stumbled upon, it's something I feel very strongly about, but collaboration is key to all of this. And I urge you all to keep the conversation going. So go find Sam in the lounge. And thank you very much, Sam. For the next, sorry, Sam, go.
Absolute pleasure. I'm so glad we could talk about it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Back in the 90s, internet shopping was a new idea. Nowadays, it's considered a necessity. It is convenient, fast, and hassle-free. That same experience has not followed into the workplace. Why is that? The answer is the need for control. Online shopping with a credit card takes away the control that large businesses need to ensure quality, to ensure standards, and to ensure the right prices. So, to maintain control at work, we still spend time on completing purchasing forms and getting approvals. And we have a procurement team who carefully find, organize, and manage a host of potential suppliers for even the simplest of purchases. Duca changes all of that. With Duca, buyers get all the control and integration they need. It's a proper purchasing system with vetted and approved suppliers, and at the same time, It's an online shop where you can browse, click, and check out. In short, it's the best of both worlds. And what's more, Duca is for African companies first. It is the next generation business-to-business marketplace, specifically for Africa and African businesses. Duca, corporate purchasing made simple. Just Duca it.